Thanks for joining us. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Spirion Fundamentals, Managing Classifications. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce our presenters. Joining us today is Gabriel Gums, VP of Product Management at Spirion. Gabriel focuses on the strategy and technology propelling Spirion's rapidly growing security platform. He's a cybersecurity industry veteran with a 19-year tenure in cybersecurity, and he spent much of that time as a security practitioner, aligning security innovations with business objectives for Fortune 100 organizations. Also joining us is Rob Server, product manager at Spirion. Rob's led the sales engineering team at Spirion over the past 5 years and is now bringing his Spirion product knowledge and passion to our product management team. He's dedicated to leveraging customer feedback and ideas to help define the products that we build to continue to solve your business problems with greater impact than ever. Welcome, Gabriel and Rob. Please take it away.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Good day and welcome, everyone. We've got an exciting topic to cover today, managing classifications throughout the data lifecycle. It's a topic that's come up more than a few times in the last, I don't know how many months at this point. And so we decided we'd carve out some time to specifically talk about why it is important, kind of how that process plays into that data lifecycle, and then even show you in the product how customers are achieving that today for those of you that are looking to kind of increase the ways that you're otherwise using it kind of in a static way beyond just discovering and applying classifications as it is. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and just jump right in. We've got just a few slides where I'll talk through exactly how this process integrates with the data lifecycle, and then Rob's going to jump us in and actually show how we do that live in the product too. So fingers crossed, we're going live with no net today. So let's first start by talking about that data lifecycle, right? What we're talking about are all of the activities that happen from creation all the way through destruction. I've got a visual up to kind of help us envision how this happens. So you have data being created, stored, used, shared, archived, deleted. And there's some nuances to some of these things. When we talk about the creation of data, we're not just talking about kind of the net new creation of data out of anywhere. We're talking about when data gets ingested from other locations. So you might have it come in, say, customer information through a web form or something of that nature. We're talking when data gets created into a new format. So you might extract data from some source of truth, some source of record, and then put that into an Excel spreadsheet, create some graphs, put that into a PowerPoint. We've got some fabulous real-world examples of where those things can go wrong when they're not protected properly. So creation isn't just the act of creating something out of absolutely nothing. I do see that the same way the life cycle does, right? Which is it's a distinct activity from just the usage of it, whereby in the usage stage, things don't necessarily always stay the same either, but by and large, those changes happen in what we would consider kind of the creation stage. And storage, you'll notice, is it's an old place in the life cycle from archival, because we're not talking about putting it away for good when we talk about the storage part of that life cycle. We're talking about we've created data. So let's use that same example. I logged into, let's say, an ERP system, and I downloaded some information and I created a spreadsheet. And now I'm going to use some of the information in that spreadsheet to create some graphs and put it into a PowerPoint presentation for my management team, right? And so what I'm talking about is now that data just kind of sits in some location where I store it. I might store that on my local machine. I might store that on a file system somewhere where my home drive is, right? That's the storage we're talking about. Not to be confused with the archival of it when I'm done with that information and I am just going to put it on the shelf for good. Usage, pretty straightforward here as well. So when data has been stored, again, we're going to follow that same example. I've created this document out of some other data share, and now it is sitting in a location, and now I go to use it. That usage may be, I might now share that file. I'll take a copy of it, I'll email it over to a colleague, right? I might take a copy of it and I might put it on another location. I might put it in Dropbox so that I can collaborate and share it that way with other people. I might share it with someone outside of the organization because that is quite common and needs to happen with data as well too, including even protected data needs to be shared externally sometimes. So when we talk about sharing, we're talking about all of the aspects of that data moving around in and outside of the organization. Archival and destruction I will conflate those two a little bit, right? For a couple of reasons. Because those two things tend to follow quickly on the heels of each other, whereby quickly might be I might have to keep something, archive it for X number of years because of some regulatory requirement, but then immediately after its archival, it gets destroyed or should be destroyed. We'll talk about some of the pitfalls of not moving between those two stages as quickly as one should. And again, I'm defining quickly there as the time by which I have to hold it is up, and now I should do something else where that something else is usually destruction. And that becomes the end of the life of that data. Although that data itself could still live in other places where it was created. It just may be within this one particular element, it's no longer necessary. Anything you think you want to sprinkle in there, Rob, before I start double clicking into each of these and talking about classification throughout?
Thanks, Gabe. It's really understanding the business rules that govern your data. So you have different requirements, you have different scopes of data, users create data, systems create data. Understand where it comes from, what your requirements are to keep it, and then simply create the business rules around that and manage that and integrate that inside the Spirion console, as I'll show you.
Excellent, excellent. All right, let's keep this train moving. So, talked about creation a little bit there. So let's talk about where classification plays a role there. So at that point of creation, we want that data to be classified to ensure that all of the appropriate controls are then applied to it. Those controls can be a number of things. So in our last workshop, we talked about how we can use our integration with AIP, MIP to apply DLP controls, to apply IRM, DRM controls. And again, what we're looking to achieve here is the second that that data is created, whether it is net new and or a subset of some other data set, we want to make sure that all of the other controls that we've defined that should be governing that data type can apply immediately. So right at that stage of creation is one of the many ways where classification comes into play there. And for those of you that are kind of intimately familiar with the way we do things, that is to say, the overall process that our product line follows, this is distinct from the discovery process, right? We're not looking to go discover data at the creation stage. We know that it's being created right now, and so we're going to classify it right now. And for you, Rob, write me out. And
very good, thank you.
That is the point of creation that I'm talking about. Not necessarily that new data may have been copied from some location to another. That is to a form of creation, but that really falls more under our usage examples, and so we'll get to that and how that both can happen at the point of usage as well as while it's in that storage environment as well. So going right down the path, extending that forward, so storage. If we've captured and classified data at its creation, this stage of the life cycle gets a little easier for us because we would have performed that activity as soon as we saw it. And so now it will have moved into its storage portion of the life cycle already with the classification on it. This is the real world, though, and that doesn't always happen, right? That doesn't happen for a number of reasons. One of the largest reasons is by the time organizations endeavor on a overall data security program that is taking classification and discovery seriously, which hopefully is from the start, we have to go back in time often and go through all of that data that's already stored, all of those data stores we have in the structured environments, unstructured environments, everywhere it lives in the cloud on-prem, and we want to make sure that that's classified. And the reason there's, again, it's the same. We want to make sure that we're applying the appropriate controls to those locations, whereby controls in the storage environment certainly tend to look differently a lot of times, right? In these areas, we're talking about access governance controls. We're talking about least privilege controls, right? And again, in order to enforce those types of controls accurately, proper handling and usage controls, we're going to get to use in a minute. Again, this is where classification plays its role in that portion of the life cycle. Yeah, go for it.
I just wanted to share that it's understanding the data at this point. So when you have very large data stores, you have to interrogate the data to accurately understand what's in there. There's no other way. There's no shortcuts here for finding and classifying data without understanding what the data elements are. So when you have those large stores, you have to look at it in detail to apply those labels.
That's accurate. And I want to pause there and talk about those labels because now I'm in that second step of the data lifecycle. And this is the important part that we've been having these conversations about over the last several months, right? Your classifications sometimes can and should change at these different stages throughout its life cycle. Creation was probably a good example of that. I mentioned, not necessarily just net new creation, but an existing document. Let's take an existing document that has no discernible information in it that is protected. Nothing at all. It's a benign Word document. It just got a bunch of words in it. But now let's say I extract some data that is protected data from another system and add that into my Word document, right? So at that point, its classification should change. It may go from being completely unclassified to being classified as whatever that additional data element is. We'll go ahead and call that additional data element. We'll call it PII at this point, right? So now that classification should be updated throughout that life cycle. The same is equally true of, let's say I'd already classified it as PII during the creation stage. The storage stage of it may require additional classifications so I can ensure, again, that same handling occurs properly. So you might want to apply additional controls there. So when I move data document from, let's say, my workstation, let's say I move that over to let's just call it cloud environment. Let's say I move that to SharePoint. It should, at that point, if necessary, as Rob points out, if your business controls call for this, your business process call for this, it should get an additional label applied. Maybe that information should no longer end back up on-prem. Or what I see a lot of times in the real world is vice versa, is that document then may be labeled that it's not allowed to live in the cloud. And so it then gets an additional label based on its first that it no longer has to live in that environment. And if the question is, well, why two labels? Why have one that explicitly says, this is internal only and it's PII? Why can't I just have one label that says PII and then all my controls just knows how to handle PII? Well, the answer is you certainly could. However, sometimes that additional level of granularity is going to allow you to apply multiple controls differently because we tend to have multiple controls up and downstream to control our data. We've got our IRM, DRMs, et cetera. That's going to tell you who can get access to it. You might have your access governance controls in there as well, performing similar things, as well as your DLP, which will tell you where it can go versus who can access it. And that just small additional layer of granularity is going to allow you to tune those additional controls so you can both reduce friction, in the environment so that users aren't getting frustrated that documents are being overly protected and I can't share it, I can't work with it, and all of those other things. And so then they just find ways to circumvent the controls you put in place.
Thanks for that, Gabe. There's one more item. It's context, ladies and gentlemen. It's understanding where, when, how it got there. That's how you build your business rules. So something may be temporal restricted, something may be locationally restricted. The classic example there is PCI DSS. And of course, there's ACLs. There's many different types of labels and rules you can apply to your data to apply the classification correctly, and then understand that, yes, they can change over time, and then you can reapply the rules and then apply the correct label at that moment.
That's accurate. And then I'm going to keep bringing up those examples as we step our way through that overall life cycle. Usage is by far, I would say, again, this is somewhat anecdotal, but just based on all the things that we see across all of our customers, the portion throughout the life cycle where the most angst is involved. In fact, it's one of the areas where we attempt to apply the largest number of controls. When that data is being used, we want to make sure the right people are using it. We want to make sure it is moving in the right locations. It can't go to the wrong locations. It's not accidentally shared with the right or wrong people, I apologize, internally or externally. It's at the usage stage where these things happen. And again, why sometimes data needs to be updated with its classifications throughout. Another classic example, there's several, but another one is kind of the temporal nature of usage. By that I mean, let me get a little less academic there. Let's say you have information that you plan on sharing with the public. That might just be new announcements. It might be your public organization and you are sharing financial data, but it could just be, some large announcements. It's some organizational change, new products, whatever the case is. That information will require that it be kept protected and private and internal only, up until the point that it no longer requires that protection because you've now shared it, and you may need to share it even further with other external entities. That classification should be updated at that point, right? These are just some of the many ways where classification becomes a very living thing within the organization so that you can have it follow all of those controls. Static classification certainly will persist. Like PII doesn't stop being PII, right? Protected health information doesn't stop being protected health information. But sometimes private and confidential information may stop being exactly that. It may become public at some point, right? So your classifications as your data makes its way through that life cycle certainly needs to be updated so that, again, you can make sure you're applying those proper controls alongside them. Sharing, quite similar to the usage, where sharing is a subset of usage, but sharing in particular is quite a bit larger than that. It's not just the data actively being used by persons or systems. This is the actual act of moving that data around internally, externally again, right? And so all of the examples that I just gave in the usage, whereby something may have changes based on time or based on the need for it to be shared internally, externally, may require that updating of that classification. Or the inverse of that is equally true. It may require that we enforce the classification that is there. And this is where a lot of the automated classification capabilities that Rob is going to further kind of double click into a bit are necessary, whereby as it's being shared, we want to make sure that those classifications don't change to something else that we didn't want them to. A good example of this, again, is I'll take that same integration with AIP, MIP, right? Applying one set of labels via that system or using the Spirion system to then go in and enforce those same labels is just one way that we want to make sure that throughout that sharing process that we have some consistency in our classification process. Moving right along, again, I'm going to conflate the archival and destruction just because of how I kind of view them. Certainly understand that in the life cycle, they are distinct activities. And this is another one where, again, time comes into play. I gave an example early on at the top of this. After X number of years, we no longer need to hold on to certain types of financial records, for example. We should have those classified for archival and destruction. Why? The short and easy answer is because as that data lays around, it can become a bit of a liability for us, right? We have data laying around that we no longer need. We should clean that stale data up, archive it, get it ready for destruction in that order, or just move it right to destruction, right? And so again, that classification needs to change so that that can happen, because we might have classifications applied to some documents to ensure that they don't get destroyed. And at this point, we want to make sure that it can then be archived and destroyed. Other business reasons why you want to make sure that your classifications are able to track information that's ready for archival and destruction. There's a cost associated with it. I don't need or want to move all of that data to the cloud. I don't need or want to have all of that data on expensive storage equipment, right? I don't need to have it sitting around on my SAN NAS devices, right? I may want to move those to cheap tape backup, right? I may just want to clean up all of that data that I don't need and move it on over. This is where the overall classification becomes more of a living thing throughout the environment. So to that end, let me jump over and let me throw the ball to Rob here, and we'll step through a couple of these things live.
Sure, thanks for that, Gabe. You should just be seeing the console now.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so I just want to review quickly. Classification starts with understanding the data. Data is not simply a simple data type like social security numbers or PCI data or PII data. You have to understand a little bit more around that. It's not simply applying a label to it. You want to understand accurately where it is through, say, AnyFind, which gives you very low false positive rates. You could apply and get less results more accurately with less false positives, less false negatives, and then reduce the end amount of work you have to do on the back end. You could build in proximity checks to add enhancements to your customer specific data, like, I don't know, employee IDs or internal intellectual property, by building in proximity checks and getting better and more accurate matches through our rule set. You could also add in thresholds to not look at any specific match, but you could look at collections of data at the point of discovery to understand whether or not this should be a document you classify appropriately. Just can't call it a social security number and say it's classified. It's much more than that. It's understanding the data as a whole and understanding what it is in that location when you do that discovery. Once you understand the discovery, you can apply your workflow rules. These are the business rules Gabe talked about earlier, and understanding if something belongs there or not, or applying classifications to different zones, or perhaps applying ACLs. The classic example here is both human resources and also PCI data. Think of what would happen if data of that type fell out of that specific element, or at the wrong time. So you're testing locations, the temporal aspect, understanding when or how old it is, the ACLs. These are the business rules that will govern the data. You already know what these are inside your organization. It's just a simple matter of translating that to something that Spirion will consume for you. Once you have the business rules governing that data, you can accommodate for different examples, different extremes like the human resources, the PCI data, GDPR, etc. You can then confidently, with your accurate results and your properly applied classification rules, a remediation action. Gabe mentioned earlier that we can apply MIP labels. This is great. You have the ability to extend AIP protection into the desktop and leverage that RMS encryption that AIP provides, and it's all managed by your Azure AD user. It's a great integration, simple way to do managed encryption on both your cloud and desktop. You could elect to perform other remediations like quarantine, move that file away from somewhere else, leave a stub file, shred that document, make sure it's gone, it's securely deleted, redact the file. Think of a spreadsheet. Human resources data is usually linked over to something else, or if you have banking information and simply cannot remove that spreadsheet, do a character replacement. Leave the document intact and usable. You've serviced that, for example, data subject access request, the right to be forgotten. That can be serviced by an action such as that. If you'd like to integrate with a third-party solution, easy way to do that, call the other solution. Execute a batch file or PowerShell script to call that solution directly and appropriately from the workflow that triggers it. Restrict access, remove those excessive permissions. We're able to remove that down to the administrators in the system and, of course, the file owner. Another way to integrate and improve downstream systems through our classifications is to execute that directly on the endpoint, which will allow you to persistently write metadata to those files. This is both visible to the end user if you want it to be, and can enable downstream systems like DLP to pick up and read our classifications and make intelligent decisions. You're empowering your downstream security systems to make better choices on data when you classify that data appropriately. How does this look operationally? Well, it's very simple. You can conduct a search. I happen to be running the GUI here. Doesn't necessarily have to be that way. You can have this run from somewhere else in an agentless fashion. Let's go ahead and start the search. And what you're going to see is the classifications being written into the files. So you're going to have classifications. This one is also going to conduct a classification on AIP. So you'll see that classification occur. We also have this classification for, in this case, SSNs. I assigned it a low priority classification because I wanted to demonstrate another factor, which is that context awareness. So what I have here is, due to the discovery rules in the context, I've applied classifications of a certain type. It's just letting me know that there's SSNs there. But I want to also change context there to have the classification change based on the location. So what's going to happen here is you're going to see a reclassification occur. The machine is going to search that file and you'll see the classification occur to something else because the context has changed. So we're able to apply those classifications based on the location, the content. We're able to get all that information back. All right, Gabe, that's the high-level portion of the demo. Just wanted to hand that back to you.
No, much appreciated. As I mentioned today, it was a relatively quick workshop. We just kind of wanted to dig into answering some of the questions as to the whys and the how of those classifications moving and updating and changing, and kind of show you just really quickly how that actually occurs within the product. We're looking to hold more of these kind of very targeted learning sessions so that we can answer those questions. So I'll open the floor up to any questions at this time. If anyone has anything else that we can help answer with regards to anything in broad general, but with regards to classification throughout that data lifecycle, happy to answer that. And for what it's worth, you certainly can always reach out to us directly offline. You can send us an email. You can reach out to your representatives. Feel free to, you can reach me directly, gabe@spirion.com. Happy to answer those questions there as well. We are pretty much everywhere online. All right, well, Rob, no, I appreciate it. This was very good. Thanks again for joining me. Always appreciate your help in demonstrating all of the additional value add that we can bring to that overall protection process. And until we do the next one, I'll talk to everyone again soon.
Thank you very much, Gabe. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.